Good morning. In the early 1990s, when I was a junior at Rutgers University, I got a job as a hostess at an Indian restaurant. You could say that my college years were probably one of the best of my life, and I know that you all will, in the audience, agree with me. At this job, I worked at a South Asian Indian restaurant that catered to the South Asian community. It was probably one of the more fancier restaurants that everyone loved to go to. It was the one that you would go to when you would have a wedding. It was the one that you would go to when there was a special date. If it was a Valentine's Day dinner or a New Year's Eve dinner, that was the one that you could go to. It was one that my own family saved to go to for exclusive occasions. I was really excited to get this job. And when I was there, I realized that it was the place to be where the quality of the food matched the ambiance of the restaurant. When I started, of course, as a hostess, you're going to know the inner workings of the restaurant. And there were several things that I noticed. I noticed that the wait staff and the chef would get there very early in the morning and would work really long hours and wouldn't go home till late at night. I noticed that the chef and the wait staff lived in one home together, and that a van would take them to and from the restaurant, back and forth. And when they were working, that van stayed behind the restaurant and waited for them. I noticed that they only had one break in the middle of their day, which was between the lunch crowd and the dinner crowd, and they wouldn't go home to rest. They stayed in the restaurant and napped in the same booths that the dinner folks would eat in later. And I noticed when a coworker let it slip that everyone's immigration documentation was in limbo. All of this was notable to me, and you could even say that my radar was up. But because of my immigrant heritage and background, I excused it. It wasn't until 10 years later, when I became a lawyer and learned about human trafficking, that I connected the dots. My childhood was filled with trips of going to India and learning about the culture. And the one thing that I noticed when I went to India were that there were a lot of servants. Anyone with money and power had servants working for them. And so, when I saw this happen while I was hostessing in college, I really didn't think much of it. I just simply thought it was a natural extension of the labor norms that would happen, just extended to the United States. And so while I noticed everything going on at the restaurant, I did nothing. My radar was up, but I did nothing. It wasn't until I graduated Rutgers University and went to law school and found my passion to represent those folks from vulnerable communities who could not advocate for themselves that my mission in life was catalyzed. My first job out of law school was to represent immigrant and asylum seekers who were detained, who could not afford an attorney. I was their public defender. And that job reignited my passion to help those in need and to help those who could not have a voice in their own justice because they did not know the laws. My mission was reignited, and I got a job as legal director in Boston at a nonprofit working with immigrants. It was this position that allowed me to realize that there was something out there called human trafficking. In 2005, there was a human trafficking case that came my way. There was a Saudi Arabian princess who was charged and convicted of human trafficking, and labor servitude of her 2 nannies and domestic workers that she brought with her from Saudi Arabia, who were Indonesian. These two Indonesian women had worked for the princess and her 5 children in Saudi Arabia, and when she came to the United States, she brought them with her. She promised them stability and more pay. So the 2 Indonesian victims left their families behind because this was an opportunity that they thought would really better their lives. However, when they came to the United States, this was not so. Things were not what they were promised to be. The princess made them work 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, and paid the 2 victims less than $300 per month in salary. They were forced to sleep in the garage or in the hallway if it was cold outside, because this was Boston. And they also were not allowed to go outside the house, to even have any freedom to go to the store. And instead were told that if they told anyone what was going on, they would not be paid and they would be deported. So the victims said nothing. But fortunately for them, the neighbors next door noticed what was going on. They realized that there were 2 women working day and night with very little freedom. They hardly went outside the house. So the neighbors alerted the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and that is how the case was exposed. We came onto the case after the princess had been arrested, and it was as an immigration attorney that I had to dig through the new human trafficking laws that had just been passed in 2000, just 5 years earlier. And it was then that I realized that these women were indeed victims of human trafficking, and also what I had seen in my college days at the restaurant could have also been labor trafficking as well. The federal definition of human trafficking is the act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, or obtaining or providing a person for compelled labor or commercial sex acts through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Traffickers know how to create a climate of fear so that victims will not feel secure to leave or won't raise their hand and scream out for help. The threats, the bad words, the condemnation that these victims feel keep them deeper into the dark hole that they're in, and they never reach for help. Just like in the Saudi Arabian case, where the victims did not go for help, and it was in fact the neighbors, the Good Samaritans, who discovered this case. Research shows that 78% of all human trafficking cases are labor cases. Labor trafficking cases. Let me say that again. 78%. You would think, right, that it's sex trafficking? That is not the case. That's what you hear about in the media. That's what people are saying. That's what we are focused on. That's what our legislators talk about. That's what policymakers talk about. But it's actually labor trafficking cases. And I propose that if we keep thinking that it's the sex trafficking cases that are the leading form of human trafficking, we are not going to change the narrative. By not speaking about labor trafficking cases, we're ignoring that it's going on, and we're not going to make the changes. We're not going to flip the script and talk about what really is going on. In my 15 years of human trafficking work, there are many industries that I have seen my clients come from. The restaurant industry, hotel industry, agriculture industry, manufacturing industry, nail salons. How many of you go to nail salons? Hair braiding salons, massage parlors, and in the home with nannies and domestic workers. Those are the industries that are exploiting our labor force. A second point that I want you to remember is that 56% of immigrants or people are trafficked outside their own home country. Okay, so if you're trafficked, you're a victim, and you're trafficked to a different country, who will you go to for help? Will you know what 911 is? Will you know who to call? Many of our clients don't even know who to call because they don't know who can help them. The police may or may not be their friend. They don't know. Traffickers are sure to tell our victims that law enforcement won't help them. And also, labor norms from other home countries, because of that, many of our victims don't even realize that they're being trafficked. What's normal in India may not be normal in the United States. The third point that I want you to remember is this one. 56% of male trafficking victims are trafficked for labor, and then 42% of women are trafficked for labor as well. You would think that only women are being taken advantage of, but that is not the case. In many immigrant communities, men are the breadwinners, usually, and they're not taking care of just their immediate family, they're also helping out extended family members as well. So men are maybe more likely to take the risk to go into a labor industry that they may not know that much about or haven't checked out. However, you can see that it's almost split in the middle, and that labor trafficking affects both men and both women. Why is labor trafficking so prevalent? One would wonder, right? Well, it's a case of supply and demand. When you can maximize your profits by using an individual and reusing them over and over and over again, your profits can reach the max. The biggest cost, the biggest cost in any industry is staff. And if you're minimizing what you pay that staff, then really the option to make a lot of money is there. That is what businesses are looking at. However, one thing to remember that is really important with human trafficking is that supply and demand is also dictated by what we see in the world. When there are global problems in many countries, that creates a vulnerable population that's primed and ready for traffickers to go in and pluck one by one with promises of a better life. Global problems such as war, famine, natural disasters, little access to education, gender inequality, create a vulnerable population that all want to have a better life. And traffickers know that. Traffickers know how to go in and make vulnerable populations feel safe and special. I've done this work for about 15 years, and I have seen broken systems that cause human trafficking victims to be in the place where they're at. But one thing that I want to offer to you is that every victim, every client I've served has a story. Their story was that they could not provide for themselves in their home country. They had a difficult time doing that. And so, with promises of better pay, they were tricked and deceived into finding that stability elsewhere. That is the story that I see every single day. 20 years ago, I was working side by side with victims of human trafficking, and I did nothing about it. I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. You could say that my radar was up, but I didn't do anything. But if your radar is buzzing, and if you're noticing weird patterns going on, if you're noticing that someone is working very long hours, it is up to you to do something about it. Now, not every case that you'll see will be a human trafficking case, and I'm not proposing that all of you become my detectives, but what you need to do is if you see something, you need to call call the Polaris Project Human Trafficking Hotline. And what they have is they have partnerships with law enforcement and local law enforcement and federal law enforcement, and they will investigate further to make sure what is going on. That is how you could help. Don't be like me and not do anything, like I did when I was in my 20s. Also, you all have purchasing power, right? You all are buying goods, you're buying services, you're buying food, products. Well, see what you are buying, if any of that is made by labor trafficking victims. All you have to do is go to slaveryfootprint.org. Take the survey and see what products are being made by victims. Be more aware. Purchase fair trade products and only support those venues, those restaurants, those businesses that also support fair trade, because that's when you know you're getting items that have not been made by labor trafficking victims. You have the power to make a difference. We must fix these global inequalities. We must also advocate for laws and policies to protect victims of human trafficking. Not one person can do this. Only collectively can we do this together. Please join me in making a difference. Thank you.